resume the recording. At least I can relax now. I know I've done that. It's often the thing that I forget. And I'd just like to welcome you all formally to this Learning Live Digital session today. And as you all know, we are going to be joined by Craig Hamill, who's going to be talking about how L&D can support a fast-growing business. Now, Craig has over 20 years experience in the world of learning and development, in leading teams and supporting regional and global learning projects. Craig now works to support enterprise L&D teams to deliver digital learning strategies to a global workforce. Craig, I can see a few people are still joining us now, but I would like to say thank you for joining us, and I will stop sharing my screen and I will hand over to you, and the virtual platform is yours. Thanks for joining us, Craig.
Thanks, Michael, and thank you very much for the introduction. I think your screen is still on there. Just before I start, that's it. I'll just get my presentation. So we're sharing it. Can you see that absolutely clearly? Yeah.
We can indeed. Yeah, perfect.
Okay,
thank
fantastic. You. Okay, so really privileged to be able to speak to you all today about how L&D can support a fast-growing business. So for those of you who have not had the pleasure to meet, I'm Craig Hamill. I've worked in L&D, as Michael alluded to, for around about 20 years now. 16 of those years was as an L&D practitioner, as a head of L&D at a technology organisation called Zonal that focused on the hospitality and leisure sector. And then unfortunately, I was a victim of COVID just last year in terms of my role as head of L&D came to an end. And I was fortunate enough to be employed by a company called Go1, who's a global learning content aggregator based all around the world, but we do have offices in London, and my role here has changed to become Senior Customer Success Manager. But as a fast-growing organisation, and as an organisation who's really inclusive and doesn't want me to stop talking all things L&D, I've been fortunate enough to be part of the EMA team to support both a wide range of internal and external customers from different verticals as their sort of learning experience lead. So that really enables me to continue to consult and advise on all things L&D, which is super exciting. So part of today's presentation really to kind of share my knowledge and experience, both from working as a head of L&D, but also my role so far within Go1, and also with the customers, a wide range of customers that I work with too. So without further ado, I will flip through some of the slides. So as you may or may not be aware, I'm sure you're all aware, we're going through one of the most disruptive periods of the last decade. And the UK economy has been, really hit by that. And I think as a result of that, what I was recently reading was that the GDP is expected to grow by 7.6%. And this, for many organisations and for many people, is going to disrupt things. But it will create more business opportunities for growth at a faster than probably expected rate. And what that does is have a direct impact on not only consumers, but also our employees and what is expected of those businesses' employees to support that change in pace. So having worked at Zonal for, as I said, 16 years and now in Go1. And what that's enabled me to do is really to be part of two fast-growing businesses. And as the majority of my existing customers are also typically in a fast-growing environment, I thought it'd be useful to obviously share some of those things as part of what does this actually mean for L&D. So I know we all like a good statistic to kick things off. So I thought I would share this particular slide with you, which is sourced from the World Economic Forum. And was from the Future of Jobs report in 2020. Now, as you can see from here, in 2020, we saw a 400% increase in the number of individuals seeking out online learning through their own initiatives. By 2025, there's expected to be around about 85 million jobs that may be displaced by a shift in the division of labour between humans and machines, which also creates a good opportunity for discussion. And 55% of businesses can't adopt new technologies because of those local labour skills gaps. So what does this actually mean to us? So I thought we would put some of those thought processes into action, and particularly when we're thinking around skills and what the World Economic Forum thought of in terms of what those key skills would be around 2025. Now, in your organisations at the moment, these may be skills that you're currently embedding within your businesses or looking to identify in terms of filling those particular gaps. So I know that some of you are super excited, and we've already started to hit the poll, which is absolutely fantastic. So what the poll question is around, where do you think those skills gaps are going to be prevalent in your organizations? Now, interesting enough, so far we've got complex problem solving, critical thinking analysis, shooting well ahead. We've got leadership and social influence, shooting ahead, resilience. That often comes up actually in conversations, particularly at the moment, when we, as part of my role, I'm curating content and trying to look for the right type of content that's relevant to organizations at the moment as they go through this period of fast growth and change. So resilience is hitting at the top. So we'll just give you another 30 seconds or so. We've got about near enough 75% of people who have participated so far. So this is for you to select multiple if you so wish, which is great. And yeah, we'll just see a little bit more in terms of.
I'm very excited, Craig, that so many people have actually got involved and taken part in it. So that's great news. Shall I give it a moment or two longer and then end the poll and share?
Yeah, and I think, you know, through most L&D practitioners and HR professionals, we tend to hear these skills sort of being battered around quite a bit. So it's quite interesting as a cohesive group how everybody's thought process in terms of their organizations, in terms of where we're up to. So I would say resilience, stress tolerance and flexibility is coming out on top at 53%. And that is followed naturally by leadership and social influence, and also active learning and learning strategies, which is some of the things that we're going to be covering as part of this presentation today, which is great. Now, interesting enough, can we end that poll, or can I do that from here? That's fantastic. And as we said, we can share those results with you. What we've got here is those top 10 skills actually grouped as a type of skill. So as you can see on the bottom left-hand corner, what they've done is they've grouped them in terms of problem solving, self-management, working with people, and technology. What was quite interesting was that the self-management piece, which covers resilience and active learning, was two of the skills that came out on top, as were a lot of the ones around sort of complex problem solving and analytical thinking was up there from what I recall. So quite an interesting poll to kind of see where we stand in terms of where our organisations are currently up to, or where we'd like to get to by 2025 to support our organisations with the fast growth and the skills that they need to operate and be as productive and high performance achieving as possible. So I've got another question for you here. I've done a Blue Peter in terms of some of the things that I believe L&D can support through fast-growing organisations around these challenges. So it'd be interesting for you to populate into chat, if you could, what you think maybe some of those challenges are that are more common in fast-growing businesses. So we're just gonna, the poll's just popped up again, so we're just gonna stop sharing that if we can. So if we just populate into chat, let's see what we think.
And just while they're doing that, Craig, I can see that David has posed a question.
Okay.
And he's saying the 400% increase in online learning. Does the report say what that was? Was it an online tool support or self-development?
Oh, so I've read so many reports recently. I can't quite recall, so I wouldn't like to 100% say on that. But I know that there was definitely some form of link between online learning and technology being something that was prevalent to that. But I couldn't honestly remember what that was, but definitely there's a massive shift in terms of that increase. So I think it was in terms of self-development, and part of that I'm going to be talking about, which is there is a definite need in terms of that individual shift at the moment in terms of taking more of an ownership for learning, and something that has been prevalent in many organizations as well, particularly around exit interviews, is still very high up on the agenda. That requirement for learning opportunities to support people in their working environment, whether it's to be able to be at the top of their game in their existing role, or because they've been identified as talent and they need to be able to do that. So I definitely, if I put my personal perspective on it, I would definitely say that from a self-development perspective, I definitely know that there's a definite requirement from that. So in terms of those challenges, let's have a look in terms of what we've got. So the business's ability to absorb and maximize development programs, together with the number of key systems and workflows and processes being introduced at a growth stage. Absolutely, I'm going to be covering that in just a second. Agreed with the infrastructure such as LMS. Yeah, and I think with the LMS thing, Annabelle, there is so much choice out there, and we're, as L&D practitioners, so overwhelmed with what the different LMS platforms are, what they can do. There's obviously the introduction of LXPs and other types of platforms. So this definitely is becoming a challenge for us in terms of deciding what's the best route for our organizations. The supporting the organization to become truly agile and developing an agile mindset going along with agile ways of working. Absolutely. And I think sometimes we forget that we often don't have all the skills that are required to support our organizations to in that agile mindset. So I think part of that is the personal development of L&D practitioners taking that step back to reflect and look at how they can support organizations better by having the skills themselves. We've got another one around LMS from Kath. We've got keeping learning at pace with new tech development. Absolutely. So more technology stuff coming through here. We've got some stuff around apprenticeship levies versus what's available. That's definitely something that's come up and go on recently as we've started to partner with more apprenticeship providers to support them with online digital content. Developing contingency plans for learning when it isn't safe to do in person. Absolutely. And D teams being more agile, so agility's come up again. So we've got some really exciting challenges there. And the reason why I say exciting is often there is a cynicism that's associated with challenges, and actually I always see this as a positive and like to see it from an optimistic point of view. I thrive off a challenge, and I think that if we can support those challenges, then all the better. So let's have a look at what I said in terms of Blue Peter and some of the challenges that I've had so far. We may be able to come back to some of those challenges that people have obviously already populated in chat. So I think for most organizations, whether you're a multinational organization or whether you are a small team, what's often overlooked and underappreciated is L&D in organizations. And as organizations move quickly at pace, whether they're acquiring other organizations, whether it's just organic growth that happens to obviously take an uphill trend, what L&D has to do is to be able to support the organization, whether they've got scarce resource within their L&D teams or not. The expectation is there. So we can't afford to kind of ignore that. We have to kind of jump on board and deal with some of the challenges head on. So these are just some of the challenges that through a survey we actually did with our around about 1,000 customers that we've got. we looked at some of the challenges that they face in terms of L&D as they are moving through this massive sort of trajectory. So the first one is really around sort of that higher attrition rates, and this is all down to sort of recruitment, retention and talent. So we possibly all know that recruitment and retention is the backbone of any fast sort of growing business. If you can't attract and retain the most sought after talent, then your growth will eventually plateau at some point. Now, luckily for L&D, we can have a meaningful impact on recruitment and retention. And I was just reading the other week a LinkedIn article, and they were saying that 94% of employees would stay at a company longer if it actually invested in their learning and development. Career growth and opportunity sometimes, and I've experienced this working in HR previously, sometimes actually becomes higher than salary. So once somebody's comfortable with salary, there is often this need for something else. And in a lot of the exit interviews that I was involved with, learning and development always came out on top. Somebody was always looking for the next thing to be able to do to support them in terms of their career and in terms of obviously advancing their performance. In terms of retention, employees are more likely to leave a company that doesn't offer learning and development. There's so much competition now in terms of you just have to look on job sites, not that I do, but you just have to look on LinkedIn or other job sites and see the wealth and breadth of jobs that are sort of out there, and that becomes a challenge then for organizations to retain their people, but also in terms of retaining the talent. And as we know, if we've got high performing potentials within our organization, they always want that next thing, and L&D is always looked upon to be able to support that and come up with the solution, even though our managers and leaders within our organizations have a really big part to play. L&D still has a part to play, and that comes down to sometimes relationships and things like that. So a strong L&D program will make your business far more attractive to that top level talent, whether it's growing talent you've already got or bringing talent in from outside. And without that L&D program in place, you're likely to miss out on some of those highly skilled employees because they'll just go elsewhere. So we often hear about future proofing in terms of skills, and that's vital in terms of fast growing organizations. There was another article that I read around, which was by Deloitte, and they mentioned that 88% of companies believe that reorganizing and future-proofing is central to business success. So to achieve that, we often hear in the L&D industry that upskilling and reskilling is really imperative in the next 4 or 5 years and beyond, and needs to become a priority for our teams. Now, failing to upskill employees, like many things, can harm productivity, can harm performance, it can move back to our attrition rate. So we really need to be ensuring that we are supporting the skills gap, but actually before that, we actually identify what that skills gap is. Often I've worked with customers who will automatically just jump on that bandwagon and say, oh, there's this thing about upskilling and Sorry, did I drop off there for 2 seconds?
Yeah, you just dropped off for a few seconds.
Did I? I do apologise.
So we've lost your deck.
You've lost my deck. Okay, yep. No worries. The joys, just bear with me.
These things are always sent to tries. And the one thing is, it does show, Craig, it's live.
It's live. You can still hear me. You can still hear me.
We can still hear you beautifully. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So here we go. Let's try this again. There we go. Right. Am I back in the room?
Yep, are indeed. Perfect. Thank you, Craig.
Okay, so apologies about that, everybody. So yes, I'm not quite sure how much of you missed it at the end of that, but basically I was just talking about sort of organizations not jumping on the bandwagon and really going back to sort of identifying what those skills are to be able to upskill and reskill in the organizations, rather than just jumping on that bandwagon and going, right, we need to be able to do something, is actually get out into the business and obviously find out that information. The supporting onboarding as we bring more and more people into organizations, because we're growing at such a fast pace. There are often organizations that have probably had their onboarding process or training program on the back of a piece of paper. So that process really needs to be defined and in place. And I definitely know that employees their expectations are a lot higher coming into organization these days. So that that onboarding program is what's going to make or break employees going, I've made the right decision to join this organization. And the other thing is that organizations more and more are moving to hybrid working. There are a really high percentage actually of organizations that I've spoken to that were already doing hybrid working. For us, I think it's not just about hybrid working, it's also about hybrid learning. So how do we support hybrid learning within organizations moving forward as well? And as our organizations are growing, there is also that increased number of management and leadership community that often we may have a management development program that is just designed for a certain population within our organizations. Now we need to think about broader, what does it mean in terms of our C-suite? What does it mean for people that are, moving from an emerging leader of the future into their first line manager position? Are we supporting them as we move through this fast pace? Our organizations are growing bigger, our structures are changing, the design of our organizations is changing. So how do we equip people that are with the right skills ahead of time rather than being reactive? We definitely need to be more proactive. There's then the alignment piece. So I'm going to be talking about this in a little bit more detail, but there's the alignment to our strategical aims, goals, and objectives. And this is really, really crucial. Whether this is crucial because it makes that last bullet point a lot easier in terms of our measurement of success, or it's because we no longer should be, if we are in our organizations, order takers. We need to be close to what's going on with other organizations, so we know that the impact that the L&D teams and HR professionals are making is aligned to the strategy of the business. Again, I've been reading some statistics around this. One of them was in the Emerald Works 2020 Back to the Future report. And I think in there it talked about only 49% of organizations say their L&D activity fully aligns with their organization's strategic goals. Another percentage that they threw out there was 52% of organizations say everyone on their L&D team understands their business strategic goals. So there's still a big gap in terms of what we need to be able to do to become more savvy to the bigger impact in terms of our alignment to the organization, where our organization is going and how we're supporting that to ensure that we've got a business that's got some high performing teams within it. We've then got continuous improvement, which is often a challenge that is often forgotten about because we're on that operational roller coaster. It's sometimes to kind of get off of that hamster wheel almost, and to take a breath and reflect on what we're doing. And particularly in a fast-paced environment where, as L&D professionals, we're being asked to go, right, okay, so we don't have anything around online. We need to change the way that we've been doing our digital delivery. We need to be thinking about what we've got in terms of our LMS and LXP solutions. We need to be thinking about what we're doing in terms of our management leadership programs, our coaching programs. So there are so many things that we're accountable for, and they get thrown at us in this big heap, and all of a sudden we have to decipher what's the priority for us. But actually, if we implement these initiatives, have we got a program of evaluation that's in place so that we can define whether the outcomes of those initiatives are a success? And often what we tend to do, we might have 10 different things on the go, and we never really kind of look at how some of those interventions are actually going, and whether we actually need to change and adapt, or whether we actually stop it altogether. So that's definitely something that we need to consider in terms of a challenge of a fast-moving organisation. And then the last one is about how do we sort of improve what we do around measurement of success, whether that's ROI or ROE. Again, it's another key metric that is looked upon in all organizations, whether you're a fast-growing organization or not. But without that, obviously, it provides us with some form of limitation, and also the perception of L&D in terms of actually what are we doing, is it a success or not. And actually the result of measuring some of these things can prove back to the business that actually the investment is worthwhile, and that spend on training and learning and development is definitely worthwhile, because it's having a really good impact in terms of having a higher profit margin, in terms of our performance, in terms of our productivity. So all of these things, I'm not preaching to you, they're probably things that you've already understood, but I think that the list of challenges just seems to grow and grow and grow if it's a fast growth or fast paced business that we are aligning to. So another thing that I wanted to talk about that was in line with those challenges is the pressures that that has on different things that make up an organization. So as you can see in front of you, we've got okay, so what, from an individual perspective, an individual shift, what kind of pressure does that put on the organization? And what about the L&D team itself in terms of the pressures that are put to support the growth? What about the organizational shift? What about the global trends? So I thought it'd be worthwhile just talking through those individual pressures to support growth. Again, please feel free to populate any questions that you've got in terms of chat. So if you start off really with the individual shift, so there is this requirement for new skills to maintain productivity and increase performance. Now, this can come from the individual itself, or the manager influencing that the individual needs to have certain skills to be able to be competent within their role. And what I found is that through talking with our customers, or through running an L&D department myself and having involvement with lots of different divisions within a business, is that individuals are taking a lot more ownership for their own learning. There's more of an appetite for their own personal development, for their career advancement. There is often in organizations a direct link to performance, which could be aligned to performance related pay, in certain roles where people are measured on achieving certain SLAs, targets, objectives, OKRs. There's the pressures on the individual to ensure that they are performing to the best of their ability. There's then the role of technology that is playing not only in organizations but also in schools and colleges, and the fact that obviously all this technology all of a sudden is at people's hands to be able to embrace learning. So seeing the desire, hunger and need for learning has almost increased as a priority within organizations is definitely something that I've seen. And as I mentioned before, even in exit interviews, it's still there. It's still like L&D could be doing more, which I think is why sometimes that does put pressure also on the L&D team to move with those pressures and the shift that then has. So in terms of that L&D shift, I know it says here as part of the presentation that the face-to-face is no longer scalable, more people and skills to develop with a lower ratio of L&D per learner. I was just talking to a customer just the other week, and they were talking about, do we have enough of a balance of L&D professionals in our team to support the size of the organisation? And I remember talking to the lady and saying, well, actually, it really depends in terms of what your priorities are, what you want to achieve, how L&D is supported within the organisation, and what that perception looks like. So there are so many different things that make up what that potential answer could have been. But one of the things came up was about moving away from face-to-face to online and digital. And then as organisations are going back to some sort of normality, face-to-face is now being brought back in. And so all of a sudden, the roles within L&D in terms of instructional designers, those who produce e-learning, for example, those who design courses to be facilitated, the facilitation of their courses. There are so many roles that are now coming out within L&D that may not have existed before, but also to support those different channels of learning within an organisation. There is a definite pressure on those teams, and whether the teams are voluminous in terms of size to support those L&D opportunities, but also those solutions. It also comes down to actually whether going back to talking about that alignment to strategy. Well, does the organisation have a strategy? Most will have. Does the L&D team have a strategy, and does that strategy, is it aligned to the organisation strategy? So often, again, it's about encouraging organisations that don't have that L&D strategy to really think about the priorities that are required within that organisation, and are the skills and competencies mapped out for L&D to support the organisation. So again, I had an organisation that turned up to a meeting the other day saying, we have 109 competencies that we need mapping with your digital content, versus I've had customers that have turned up going, we don't know where to start, we don't know what to do, where do we go from here? So there's definite pressures on L&D teams to really kind of keep up with that pace of change and that expectation of the organisation as well. And those opportunities definitely need to kind of be there. I'm just going to check in chat to see if we've got any questions.
I was just about to say, Craig, there's a question talking about those priorities and those pressures. I think it was Stella a few moments ago, just going back to what you were talking about ROI and ROE, and she was saying, how would you suggest that we go about ROI or ROE successfully, as we seem to spend so much time and effort on these areas, but she doesn't think we've cracked it yet? Any advice that you can give Stella on ROI and ROE?
So what I would say is, I'm going to be talking about it in a minute, but I think the alignment piece is so key. I think and this is not assuming that you don't do this, Stella, by the way, but in certain organisations, and I've fallen foul of this back in the day, where we jump too far ahead, get involved in implementing a learning intervention, and by that point we haven't really understood whether we've got the exact backing, whether we've got an alignment to the organizational strategy, whether we've actually done any deep discovery about why we're actually going on this journey, why we're putting this learning intervention in place in the first place. So all of a sudden what happens is we get caught up in that operational roller coaster without doing that discovery, without doing that alignment. And before you know it, we have moved on to the next thing, and we're being asked that how successful has that learning intervention been? Now, because we haven't done that discovery piece, we haven't got the alignment, because we don't have that exec sponsorship maybe to support us on that journey and come on that journey with us, it becomes really difficult to focus on what the success has been of that particular learning intervention. So I think if I was to answer that question, we're going to be coming on to it in a little bit more time.
Thank you, Craig.
I'm just conscious of me getting through the rest of the presentation just to ensure that we've covered those bits which are going to come up. But thank you, Stella, for asking that question. Great question. In terms of the organizational shift, then, there is this internal trigger that requires an uplift from L&D. And all of a sudden, I believe that L&D has, not in all organizations, but many organizations, has now got some form of seat at the table, whether that's they've started to be asked by and taken more seriously by the exec. They've started with functions within the business, have started approaching. So it's changing that sort of push-pull dynamic to ensure that people are now coming to L&D practitioners going, right, we need to be able to do this. How can you support us? And I think that dynamic maybe has changed to how it used to be, which is a really exciting opportunity, I think, for our professionals. I think that organizational leaders are doing more and more now around thinking more and more about their culture, about their mission, about their values. I know that within our organization at the moment, through working with our customers, there's definitely a lot in terms of content that's aligned to organizational values and the mission, in terms of making sure that that's part of what people live and breathe as part of what they do. And I think that it then becomes this kind of vicious circle whereby the individual is asking for something, the L&D now requires something, and the organisation is now asking for something. And I think it's now a blend of each of those parties coming together, and that's, I think, the secret ingredient for success. I think then what happens is you've got the global trend, and the global trend is, as you know, within L&D, there's always a hot topic, whether it's upskilling and reskilling, whether it's psychological safety, whether it's what we use in terms of data insights to help us formulate a strategy moving forwards, whether it's migrating to digital, whether that's blended or it's fully digital. I think that there are now more pressures on L&D to support organisations because that organisational shift is now being sort of impressed upon by those global trends that are happening as well. And I think then when you start looking at social learning, micro-learning, immersive technologies such as AI, it becomes quite complex. And I think that's why the evolution of L&D, I think at the moment, is really exciting. And though there are these challenges and there are these pressures to support organizations in terms of their growth and this fast pace of change, I think it's a really exciting time to be part of the L&D community, even though at the moment I obviously am on the vendor side of that. So how do we then approach the future of L&D if we've got so many challenges and we still don't think we've got it right in certain things? So what I wanted to be able to share here is just an approach that I've been using at Go1 with my customers when they come to me and go, right, we've got digital, we're coming on this journey with you in terms of digital content. How do we approach this? And it was a approach that I'd actually used within L&D when I was head of L&D to help formulate a structure to making learning interventions a success. So whether that was a management and development program, whether that was coaching a program, whether it was bringing on board our very first LMS, this approach worked really well, and it's really simplistic to follow, and it's called the AIM approach. So it's imagine it's a bit like a book. With a book you have a beginning, a middle and an end, and this is essentially the AIM approach is very similar in terms of the start of it is all about the alignment piece, the middle piece is all about implementation, and the final piece is about measurement. So I just wanted to kind of share and take through those kind of three key aims of the AIM approach. So step one is all about alignment. So I think the issue particularly with alignment is often we don't ask that very simple question, which is why. We often don't have that depth of understanding. We have no evidence of the need. There's no evidence of what the strategy looks like. So what we need to be able to do is we need to turn that into a solution. And that solution is really about understanding the context of the issue, the requirements and the challenge. It's about us not getting carried away and jumping in too quickly. And it's about us focusing on the problem, not necessarily the solution. The solution will come, but we need to be able to focus on that first. The secondary part of alignment then is around the awareness of the needs and the skills. So we need to be able to do some form of thorough analysis and to be able to look at the skills that we need to develop. So this is really about, we've taken it from the why to now the how. But the issue is that we make an assumption about what the requirements are within the business. We think we know what's best. And sometimes that's because we don't have a relationship with people within the business, and we don't have the rapport to be able to have those conversations. And sometimes that having that blockage and barrier, because we don't have that relationship, sometimes makes it more of an uphill struggle. So what we need to be doing is we need to be thinking here about the short term, and not only the short term, but also the long term requirements of the organization to help shape the organization to drive performance and productivity. The solution again is stakeholder management. I could not, one of the things about even working in the role that I'm in now that is so crucial is that stakeholder engagement. It's the start of building a relationship. It's the start of building trust. It's showing that you actually really understand the operation within the business, and the continuation of raising your sort of organizational awareness of where they are in their journey and how you can support them from an L&D perspective. It's about uncovering those business outcomes and objectives through having some great conversations. It's about not just about the now, you need to also focus on the future. Now, this isn't always rosy, so be aware of certain resistance and difficult conversations, because there'll be people within your organization you probably think about now that you've had to have a very challenging conversation with, whether it be because they're stuck in their ways, but it may also be because they don't know what they don't know. They don't know what's available. Working in L&D all the time, we tend to be able to know what's out there, what we can offer, but we don't always have the conversations to say, this is what we can do to support you, and this is how we can gain alignment to your objectives and goals within your department, but also the overall organization itself. The third one, which often comes up when I deliver webinars or presentations, is around this exec buy-in and the alignment with an exec sponsor. Now, this isn't always possible. But this is all about getting that sort of early commitment and support to help you drive what you're trying to achieve. Again, some of this will come down to relationships. Some of it will come down to perception of what L&D is like within the business. So if you can get some early advocates on that journey with you, and if they happen to be as part of the exec or an exec sponsor for your learning interventions, then that should really help you with supporting you on that journey. And often being prepared. So what we need to be able to do is we need to flip the conversation on its head, where we're being proactive and we're informing, we're influencing, we're justifying, and we're selling the benefit and demonstrating that we know and we understand the why we need to do this and what it looks like and how we're proposing to do it. You need to basically have a plan. You need to be thinking about the risks and the obstacles, and don't be naive to think that the learning intervention that you're trying to put in place is the only priority within the business, because there'll be many competing priorities that you'll need to obviously deal with at that point in time. So the second part, so that's alignment. The second piece is around implementation. So this kind of starts with, okay, so we've decided that we are aligned. We've decided we've done that thorough analysis. We've maybe got that exec sponsor buy-in. We now need to move on to implementation. Now, you may read this going, choosing the best learning content for the audience and outcomes. So you may think, well, that's aligned to sort of a digital provision, but it isn't. If you are looking for vendors because you outsource people coming in to deliver your face-to-face, you need to be thinking about, are you choosing the right learning content? Are you choosing the right suppliers to be able to support you with that? Even down to the best learning content is down to the way in which your instructional designers are creating that and creating that vision and creating that content to support the audience and the outcome. So I think the opportunity here is about becoming that strategic partner, getting the stakeholders involved, getting out into the business and really understanding the audience and the culture, understanding those learning preferences so that you can choose, you can write, you can identify the best learning content. The next part of that is then around whether you want to go big bang or whether you want to test that content with a focus group. And definitely when you are in a fast moving organization, the pressure's on to get something in there as quick as possible. And I think here it's about making sure that you do some sort of due diligence where you are testing that type of content on some sort of focus group. Now, Now, that could be a small party of people. It could be a small part of the overall design. But if you can test some sort of content with a focus group, I think what that does is it starts to create hype. It starts to create some advocates for learning. It starts to build some of those relationships and get stakeholders involved early on. And I think the final stage here in terms of the implementation is then about running that program. That's all about sort of becoming agile, not having those rose-tinted spectacles on to make sure that you are aware of the risks and challenges that could potentially occur. So preparation and planning is really key here. Have you thought about how you're going to communicate it? Have you thought about how you can work collaboratively with HR, with marketing to embed this program so it delivers a successful piece of work? This is about also thinking about 10 steps ahead in terms of the what ifs. So what if something goes wrong? Do you have that backup plan? So I think really what we ideally need to be doing is thinking about these different steps rather than going full steam ahead, not thinking about testing this, building the stakeholders up, building some advocates, and then obviously being aware that there are potential risks. And then the final one, I'm just conscious of time, it's just around measurement. So this is about how are you sort of harnessing data and tracking outcomes as a strategical asset. So again, this might be something that you think about in the early days when you're thinking about that alignment piece and how you're going to measure that sort of moving forwards. Data and insights can become your best ally. So whether this is through reporting, whether it's referencing back to the needs, the outcomes, the objectives, or even down to the insights that you can now get from stakeholders that you couldn't get before because you didn't have that relationship in place, that is really, really crucial. Are you increasing visibility and raising the profile of your work? That's really, really key, because again, the perception of L&D actually should be carrying some great weighting within organizations and shouldn't be seen as just a supportive mechanism that's a part of the cog in the wheel. I think we need to be putting ourselves out there, and particularly when you have those pressures as a fast-paced organization, we need to be seen as a strategic partner within that business. And are you showing that evidence of alignment to business strategy and strength as that strategic partner? That's so key, and I think it's really that opportunity for us to now be able to focus on being that proactive strategic partner to ensure that we've got that success. So get out into the business, make sure that the whole team, if you're fortunate enough to be with a team of L&D professionals, get out there and understands what's going in the business, etc., etc. So I think that's really key as well. So that's the measurement bit. The other bit that I often just throw in at the end of measurement is the often bit that L&D forgets is the praise and recognition piece, which is giving yourself that pat on the back for going, well, what we've done so far has been a great success. How can we build on this and make it even better? So I think often we don't do that enough. So that's it. So let's have a look to see if we've got any questions. Just in case anybody needs to drop off at this point, I just want to thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. I know it's been a lot of me talking, so hopefully you've been able to bear with me. If you want to get in contact with me, I am on LinkedIn. If you want to find out a bit more about what Go On does, then please do. I am very much a big part of Learning with Go On, which is a podcast series where we go out and we talk to learning professionals across the globe, whether it's an instructional designer, whether it is a CLO of an organization, whether it's a trainer who facilitates classroom training. We have been going around the world. So far, we've been to Italy, Egypt, America, Australia. We've got something planned for Norway and Cyprus. So if you want to get involved with doing a podcast, then also please get involved, because we'd love to be able to share your story as well. So thank you very much from me. Michael.
Thank you very much indeed, Craig, and thank you for sharing those insights. We have got a couple of questions. Have you got time for me to just give you one question from Julie, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
She was just going back to what you were talking about and asking, where does blended delivery fit? As face-to-face is coming back with much lower numbers, people's expectations with resistance to travel and to attend training, is this a backward step from remote delivery, digital delivery?
Yeah, so I think for me it's about, I think there'll always be a place for face to face, and this is because when I used to be able to, I think when I used to before the pandemic, and we were trying to roll out certain digital content and doing more online delivery, there was still that massive appetite for face to face. I think because it's moved away from that, like Julie's put in here, there is that kind of, oh yeah, I don't really want to go back to it because I'd never really taken advantage of online or digital or remote before, and this is actually quite exciting. I think now it's about not only having that blended delivery, but I think it's about whetting the appetite of people to bring them back into the classroom. I think what I remember from doing face-to-face was it wasn't just about content. It was about improving commercial awareness. It was about improving organizational awareness. It was about building relationships. And there are certain things that you can do remotely and online, but in a face-to-face environment, there's certain content that sits more comfortably with a face-to-face environment. And I think it's just going back to the drawing board and going, okay, if we are focusing on face-to-face being part of our strategy, how do we want to deliver it? How do we show that actually we can have the blend, or it can sit in silo, but what is the need? If you always go back to why and what is the need within the business, then that should hopefully answer some of those questions for you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. And there is just one other question, which I'm just trying to find where it was. And apologies, I can't find the name of the person. It slipped straight past.
That's
I think
okay.
the final question, you talked a lot about supporting hybrid working and learning. Can you just give an advice on how we can support that hybrid working and learning? Any advice on that?
Oh, so this takes me back to one of our podcasts, actually. So if you want a really detailed podcast, I think it was podcast 11 or 12, I did one with Quantum Rise, which was all about hybrid learning and certain tips, techniques and hacks. So I think as far as hybrid learning goes, I think there's been a lot of talk about hybrid working, and often we forget that actually what does it mean from a hybrid learning perspective? And it can be anything from the administration of it. It could be anything from the skills of the L&D practitioner. So for example, are we just lifting our face-to-face content and shoving it in a glorified PowerPoint and delivering it? Or actually, are we really thinking about the interactivity of it and making sure that it's going to be a success? So we may have found that there's a need for it, but actually what's the quality of what we're actually positioning in front of our employees? So I think that's something that definitely needs to be thought about. I think there's a room to play. I've obviously got a slight bias in terms of go on, but there is definitely a room to play in terms of digital content that just in time, we need to, in learning in the flow, it has to play a part, and I know that it does because of obviously the organizations that I work with. So I think when it comes to hybrid learning, I think it should be seen as an exciting opportunity to use technology in the classroom. So going back to what Julia said about face-to-face, there is this opportunity where before it might have just been a trainer stood in front of the classroom, to now actually bringing technology into the classroom where you can actually pull in the hybrid sort of digital and online element. And I think it's also about making sure that people who are coming into our learning sessions remotely, that we don't forget those, because it can often be forgotten about in terms of the other way around. So if we're delivering in a classroom, we need to be conscious of our people that are dialing in remotely, but also if we have a massive contingent that are remotely, that we don't forget the people that are in the classroom. So I think we just need to be aware of, again, the different challenges, but also the opportunities that come with hybrid learning. So check out our podcast. There's definitely one which is around hybrid learning with Quantum Rise, if you want to find out more.
Thank you, and I can see that the information's up there on the screen, Craig, about the podcast and what have you. So, I'm really sorry, everyone. We have come to the end of our time with Craig today. So, Craig, I'd just like to say on behalf of everyone that's been on the call today and everyone at the LPI, thank you very much indeed for sharing those thoughts and insights. And I'm sure that as we have run out of time, I'm sure Craig would be more than happy for you to connect with Craig directly using his email address there. If you'd like to connect with Craig, I'm sure he'd be more than happy to answer any queries or questions that you may have. Just to let everyone know that Craig, I do believe, will be attending our Learning Live event on the 8th and 9th of September. So if you did actually want to meet Craig in person, I've just popped the link in there to the event website. So if you did want to register and join us at Learning Live, then there's the information. And as I say, Craig is going to be attending there, so you would actually be able to probably spend some time with him face to face. Again, Craig, thank you very much indeed for joining us today. That does bring to the end of today's session. Thank you everyone for joining us. As I mentioned earlier on, the recording will be circulated and will be posted on the Learning Live digital website a little bit later on. So just feel free to pop there and have a little look, and actually be able to find that link directly from the Learning Live website, which I popped up onto the screen there. So it just leaves me to say now I'm going to stop the recording.